This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, you say you want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world.
Message, but that is one of the things that I'm criticizing, is that the generalness of it leads to that being the, in fact, only takeaway, that positive thinking fixed climate change in 2 months.
If we reframed it not as positive thinking but positive focus, would that change your interpretation of it? Because if you spend your entire life focused on the flaws of the world and how to fix the flaws of the world, you can come away with a negativity bias, with a inaccurate assessment of the actual state of the world. And it is important to occasionally step back and actually look at the data trends and say, yes, there is an unconscionable amount of suck in the world, and we absolutely need to fix that. But on the macro scale, how are we actually doing? Are we doing better or worse than we were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? I do think that we are unnecessarily biased towards being so focused on the problems of the world that we tend to assume the problems of the world are getting worse, when, in fact, and by most available metrics, while the world is far from as good as it could be, it is getting better by most available metrics. Would you agree with that assessment?
I mean, I agree with the idea that we are focusing a bit on a lot of places where the world is going bad. And I think that one of the reasons that I found this movie kind of distasteful in a certain way is that the places where we are looking at the ways that the world is going bad are things like, murder rate, general crime rate, overall healthiness, like places where we can look at numbers and go like, yeah, this is generally getting better than it was 10 years ago. But there's a lot of other places.
I'm looking at it. In fact, I'm looking at a chart right now about the global hunger index scores and how they're changing over time. They're improving.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
But there's also other places where that's not true, like, the impending climate crisis, general global instability, the apparent new rise of fascism. That's a fun one.
Yeah. So when a thought experiment I really like to ask in situations like this, where people point out that here are the metrics that are improving, but here are also the things that are getting worse. A question I really like to ask, and feel free to answer or not answer. This is totally voluntarily here for you. Is, let me pose this hypothetical to you. If you were going to be put into some random human life, you'd have no control over who you were, where you were born, what your age, gender, sexuality, race, wealth class. You had no control over any of that. The only thing you got to pick was the year in which you were going to be born. What year would you pick?
See, I think that I see the point that you're making. And I think that is a particularly white America-centric viewpoint. Because I'm going to speak fully from my own experiences. Like, I am a white man. I'm in a very privileged place in America. I'm a white man with enough money to take care of themselves. It's a fairly privileged position to be in overall. But I'm also a queer man, and a lot of my friends, loved ones, people I know are in a very similar place with that. We are currently staring down a potential near future in which the government of the place where I live could, based entirely on things mostly, if not entirely outside of my control, could want me and everyone that I care about dead in the next 3 years. And yes, there are a lot of things that are improving, and I'm not trying to discredit that reading of things. But I think that a lot of that ignores specific experiences, which are one of the things that you were arguing for in looking at, how many people will be hurt by the end of the world. Like, we're kind of ignoring a lot of places where things are having problems and being told somewhat explicitly that the reason that things are going bad is because I'm not optimistic enough is a little bit distasteful from that position.
So that's kind of why I tried to phrase the hypothetical as not you're going to be who you are, a wealthy, queer American living in Brooklyn, pick a year. That's why I tried to phrase the hypothetical as you have no control over that. It's a random life of any demographic, any wealth class, any random human life, because you are absolutely right that I am a straight person, and I fully acknowledge that today is not a great time to be a queer person in America. It is probably by many metrics worse than it was a year ago or even 3 years ago. But how does that compare to a random human life, or even a random queer life at some random point in history? Like, would you rather be who you are now, or would you rather be who you are now but in 1910?
I think that's one of the interesting things. Let's take I think that's interesting. I was going to answer more fully, but I think you giving just the random year gave me an interesting thought, which is if I was going to say who I am now, 1920s is actually not a particularly bad time for queer people in the U.S. compared to right now.
Okay, fantastic. So we say the 1920s. We want to be born in the 1920s. In 20 years, though, that means you're going to be living through World War II. So even knowing that, would you still pick to be who you are in the 1920s, knowing that there was a World War I and knowing that World War II and the Spanish flu and all of the catastrophes of that were in your near and
But see, you could very much say that for right now in the same kind of way, because now you're just using hindsight to basically say any particular time is or could be bad.
Mm-hmm. So I would ask then to make the assessment of, on the metric of, say, deaths by violence, deaths by political violence, deaths by war, or things like that, would we be better off choosing to live in the 1920s or choosing to live today, knowing nothing about who we would be?
Well, right.
And I think an honest answer... Sorry, 1920. Sorry, but 1920 versus today.
1920s was specifically because I was looking at this thing about things about queer history and the general ups and downs that we're in fact lying about, of how, we have this idea of perpetual progress for everyone that just isn't the reality.
Things are a little bit more complicated. There are
absolutely.
reactions
but
and
if you're
fallbacks
saying I can't
pushes forward.
I don't know enough about a lot of the rest of the world to be able to honestly tell you a year that I would rather be randomly born into. But if you were to say that I had just a random chance to be born into any life in the world right now, I don't know if I would honestly take that over anything else, because most people in the world are not living in the global capitalist core. They're living in other places in the world that core is, leeching off of, intentionally making worse in a lot of cases. Like, the global south has been decimated, is being hit massively with climate crises of our making, has been intentionally destabilized. Like, there are a lot of terrible things going on outside of our, capitalist center here that most of the world is going through, because a very comparatively few people are living in a position where a lot of those metrics matter.
I would argue that those metrics always matter. They aren't an excuse to justify the great evil that has been done by colonialism. But even in places that are outside of what you call the global capitalist core, like even in Africa, the life expectancy in Africa today is 30 years higher than it would have been in, say, 1920. So even if we were saying your random life was going to be something outside of our experience as wealthy Western Americans, I would still argue that if you wanted to maximize the odds of living a happy, healthy, long, fulfilled life, just on the statistics, you would want to pick as close to modern day as you could. And that's what Tomorrowland... it gets a lot wrong, but that is one of the things that I think it gets right, is that you need to be focused on improving the world. Never stop acknowledging the things that are wrong with the world and focusing on what we can do to fix it. But don't become so fixated on the negatives that you fail to realize that life is actually extremely good, and for most people, by the historical standards of what life was.
Yeah, infant mortality rates kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Even, just like 50 years ago. But
Yeah,
they are, improving over time, and that's kind of nice.
Yeah, we're literally living an entire lifetime longer than the average human was in 1900. That's a remarkable accomplishment. It is not an excuse to say that the entire world is better, or that there is not still an immeasurable and unconscionable amount of suffering in the world. But it's at least an acknowledgement that the world of today is better than the world of yesterday. And I wish that our visions of the future were, as Frank said in the beginning, I wish the future still was something we looked forward to. Maybe not as an idyllic, magical, perfect city on the future, because the world is never going to be idyllic and perfect, but at least as a place that, through the hard work and dedication of people from all disciplines, from all backgrounds, can continue to incrementally but measurably and unstoppably improve.
All right, so what do you think happened then? Because by the arguments of this movie, the 1950s was perfect, which is also a problem that you get with a lot of this, like, the future used to be better sort of narrative. Because that's when they were envisioning the best future.
That is a source of a lot of commentary. Like, I have tried to figure out when did the future become something that we stopped seeing as better rather than worse. And the interesting thing about it is I'm not actually able to clearly establish that that's true. It may be the fact that this is gonna get complicated. It may be true that the future of the past was actually worse today than it was back then, if that makes sense. We have a tendency to remember the optimism of the past more so than the pessimism. So I actually haven't been able to confirm that this actually does represent a real shift. Culturally, there's some really interesting metrics that you can track. Like, for example, I found a really cool analysis of when apocalyptic of what percentage of movies were post-apocalyptic over time, and there is a definite uptick in that. So that at least kind of agrees with Tomorrowland's hypothesis that the future went from something we idolize to something we fear. But I wouldn't consider that to actually be definitive data. So I actually don't know if the future went from being something we idolize to something we fear. It certainly feels true, though.
Well, what's kind of interesting...
But whether it actually is true or not is hard to tell.
If you bring apocalyptic fiction into it, which this movie very directly wants to, that's a product of exactly the same time period. Mm-hmm. Because
there's a lot of great apocalyptic fiction from the Cold War. Yeah. Some of the... I mean, you mentioned Fallout. That's a modern piece of post-apocalyptic fiction, but it's entirely set in the time of the World Fair.
Yeah, it's basically taking that apocalyptic aesthetic. Which, you know, the 50s were the age of optimism, etc., but also...
At least in this country.
Yeah, but the first time in human history that we had to seriously grapple with the possibility that we could imminently destroy the world.
Yeah. It was the first time where the idea of an anthropogenic apocalypse was realistic, rather than it being an asteroid or an alien invasion or something from outside of our own capabilities.
Or a purple cloud.
I think the critique that I would actually take, I saw this interesting breakdown of the problems with Fallout 76, the as to this point newest game in the Fallout franchise.
Which I have not played, so I may not be able to provide useful comment.
Well, I didn't really play it either, but it's to talk about the way that the story evolved from the earlier games to this modern iteration, because the earlier Fallout franchise was very anti-capitalist, critiqued the 1950s in a very tongue-in-cheek way, and the entire setup of that is that earlier society failed, and any attempts to recreate that society now off of their blueprint are also doomed to fail because of, that society failing in a fundamentally flawed way. Fallout 76, the end point of the game is you getting to launch a nuclear weapon at a random spot on the map for fun.
Yep.
So you've changed it from, nuclear weapons and the nuclear apocalypse are a terrible endpoint of a flawed society to a fun toy. And I feel like it's
reminded of Nelson Muns's from The Simpsons poster of Nuke the Whales.
Yeah.
Because you got to nuke something.
Which is one of the things that I feel like is possibly a modern, strange misreading of post-apocalyptic fiction. And it's not even really the pessimism of it. It's the fun that people are trying to have now. Is the idea that I would live through the apocalypse and have a great time on the other side, as opposed to a way that a lot of post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction was presented, which is a warning. Dystopian fiction, especially, like 1984, is not an aspirational novel. It's there to say
very much a don't do this.
It's like that.
Don't build the death vortex.
And cyberpunk, which is one of the things that's getting more and more relevant. Like those genres are very much a, if we do not change something, here is what's going to happen. It's not look at this, look how great this could be.
But it's not here is what is going to happen. It's here is what I, a specific creator with a specific aesthetic and a specific fiction and a specific background in fiction, believe will be a compelling world to tell a story. Like I don't think most cyberpunk stories are actually written as cautionary tales. I'm sure some are, but I think most cyberpunk stories are written because they are a interesting world in which to tell a compelling and visually interesting story.
Well, possibly that's changed recently, but one of the things that people are misreading in cyberpunk is the punk part of it. Because punk in itself is a anti-capitalist, very political movement that is saying there's a lot of stuff wrong in society and let's fuck it up a bit.
Time to get the bad out and start bashing.
So
take that, Margaret Thatcher.
But there's kind of two ways to use that kind of storytelling mechanism of society is fucked up, let's start bashing it. You can use that punk aesthetic as a message, as a way to say, look at your society, look at this society, it's fucked up, look at these people, start bashing it. Now look for things in your own society that are allegorically similar, go start bashing them. Or you can use that aesthetic as simply a useful way to tell a compelling story. Not all apocalyptic stories are commentaries on the real world. Many are. Many of the best ones are. But you can have cyberpunk, you can have apocalypse, you can have dystopia in ways that are purely settings for interesting stories without them necessarily being a commentary on the real world. Would you agree with that?
I agree that there are places where they're trying to do that, which is the critique of the Fallout 76 critique that I was just repeating. That is a fundamental, not only misuse, but a misreading of what you're doing, because that's doing almost the same thing that I feel is my problem with this movie, which is trying to ignore your aesthetic backdrop as something that can be apolitical. Because the one thing that's been danced around a little bit when we've been discussing this movie is that particular future. I agree with you that things are a lot better now than they used to be, and that we can focus on the negative in a lot of ways. But saying, here is our nice aspirational future of the 1950s. That's why I said what went wrong. Like, not that what went wrong with our imaginings of the future, but according to the text of this film, imagining that future is what should keep everything moving smoothly and well and avoid apocalypses. And we're kind of facing down a lot of problems right now that one would imagine would have been avoided if you had continued imagining that future in a way that the movie is suggesting.
So are you asking what in the text of the movie caused Tomorrowland to go from being the open community that was going to start inviting people into a closed society? Are you asking, like, in the text of the movie,
I think
what
that
happened
it's
there?
both. We didn't get it in the text of the movie, which then engenders the question of, if what the movie is positing is true, like, that didn't happen in our real world.
You mean if the future no longer being a place to look forward to, but a place to fear, if that actually happened?
Well, no, see, the future that it's saying was imagined is this retrofuturistic 1950s vision of the future, which we all agree was present at the time. Which means that if the thing that this movie is positing is accurate, it should have gone from then to now without any particular problems, because that's when they were imagining that future. So if everyone was imagining that future, they should have been doing the thing that the movie is saying to be doing, which means everything should have turned out great.
So if you're asking why in the movie did the future become something bad, I think the answer to that is because we don't have a story otherwise. Because in our world, in the real world, the future is not something that most people look forward to.
But I'm also saying that...
Well, I do.
I'm also saying that textually, if you agree with the message of the film, we need to critique why historically the message that the film is saying will work didn't work. Like, in our actual real world, not just in the context of the movie. The movie is positing that having a optimistic vision of the future should solve a lot of problems that don't seem to have been solved by the 1950s having an optimistic version of the future.
I think I would say having an optimistic vision of the future solves more problems and has solved more problems than having a apocalyptic dystopic mindset. The problems that we have solved between the 1950s and today would have not been solved or taken longer to solve if people were of the mindset that there is no point to solving these problems, to doing the hard work, to inventing the technologies, to solving the structural problems, because apocalypse is coming.
I think
if people's response... Go ahead.
Sorry. I think that that's still running into a white-centric reading, or a privileged-centric reading, I guess I could say. Because I'm a little uncomfortable with the suggestion being put forward in there that if societal progress is dependent on a optimistic vision of the future, then a lot of the stuff that did happen that we could count as societal progress socially, like the civil rights movement, was done by people who were completely left out of any optimistic version of the future.
And even they, that is absolutely true, but they didn't take a suboptimal view of the future as
Acceptable.
Exactly, as acceptable. Because the perfect vision of the future in the 1950s is not perfect. That has been dissected to no end. The idyllic vision of the 1950s, as the 1950s saw it, was incredibly white, incredibly Americocentric, and in no way addressed many of the worst problems that were present in the 1950s. But the people who did the hard work to make the actual future of the 70s and 80s and today so much better than it was in the 1950s wouldn't have done so if they saw that quote-unquote idyllic future of the 50s as acceptable and unchangeable. And it's a good thing that they didn't see that, because otherwise the future would have stayed unimproved. And I don't see any reason to think that that's less true today. The vision that we have of the future today is an imperfect one. I would say the vision that we have of the future today is one that is not better than the present. I think most people's on aggregate average view of the future is not one that the world gets progressively better. I disagree with that. Personally, I think the world is continuing to improve and will continue to improve, but I think it would improve faster if people's default position was that the future is not fixed, it is not out of our control, and any small contribution, any little change, any one pin can branch out and improve the future for everybody in ways that might not happen if your mindset was one of fatalism.
I think what's interesting is I would argue exactly the opposite point. Like, not about fatalism, because fatalism is its own issue that I think we are getting into if you look at, say, our current rash of doomsday cults and etc. But I would say that that one of the core driving principles that you can look at for times of mass social change, like the civil rights movement, wasn't because people were finding the future more or less optimistic. It was because they found the present untenable. And needing to change your circumstances in the present is a very different thing than imagining any kind of prospective future. What you're basically saying is don't get so pessimistic that you don't think anything can change. But there is a large difference in saying us, fairly privileged white people, don't imagine that things can't improve, and someone who is living in like a non-white person living in 1950s America, where your only particular choice is to change things because the present that you find yourself living in is an untenable position.
Do you think that the film makes that pretty explicit in the way it shows the closing montage? Because the original Tomorrowland, the one that we see in the Pinvitation sequence, the vision of the 1950s, is kind of different than the one that is implied by the closing montage. The people who they're giving pins to are from all walks of life, from all classes and levels of privilege. Like we see them giving pins to a Haitian refugee who is planting trees in a bomb hole, to a lawyer in Hong Kong, or sorry, a judge in Hong Kong, a hiker in the Pacific Northwest, a kid artist who is playing his guitar as a street busker in Japan. It's an acknowledgement that the future as portrayed in the 1950s was inadequate, and the future of today is a better one because it includes people from all of these various backgrounds.
I think that's difficult to say. I don't think they do make it very explicit because of the Pinvitation sequence itself being a 1980s and 90s diversity commercial. Like one of the central, let's say, characters in the ad sequence is an attractive South Asian woman who is like the poster astronaut, which is kind of exactly the same thing that we do now when you want to say, look at our tech diversity.
Well, within the text of the movie, we don't actually know if that's what Tomorrowland was. That could have been, as you say, a advertisement without an actual reflection of what Tomorrowland was, because we have no evidence that what happened in the Pinvitation sequence in the movie is actually what they were. The only certainty we have is what we see of Tomorrowland in David Nix's era and what Tomorrowland is trying to become in the closing montage.
Which is, as you say, all speculation. So if we only go off of what the movie is showing us, we barely see anyone in Tomorrowland the first time you see it. we see this probably fictional, but who knows how fictionalized version of Tomorrowland in the Pinvitation, and we see essentially post-apocalyptic Tomorrowland at the end, with absolutely no textual explanation of any of it. So I agree that it's showing them, like, drawing people from all walks of life, which is a better version of the future. But since they still haven't done a lot, in my mind, to disavow the idea that they're still just picking special people, they've just kind of changed where the line of special people is. They've gone from special people are only white people to special people can come from all walks of life. But that is still dealing with the central dilemma of we've just picked out a bunch of special people who are going to live here separate from society and do our own thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the villain in Brad Bird's first Incredibles movie, Syndrome? Remember his most famous line?
Mm-hmm.
When everyone's super, no one will be. It's explicitly a line that he gives to the villain of his other story, is the belief that if everyone is special, no one is. Because I don't think he believes that, and I don't think the film portrays that. I think the thing it's trying to show is that specialness is, again, it's like in Ratatouille. Not everyone can be a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Apply to what you're seeing here?
But I think that that's the central problem. Is the thing that you're saying the movie is espousing is an inspirational viewpoint. Anyone can achieve greatness. But that particular message, even from Ratatouille and The Incredibles, is maybe everyone can achieve greatness, but most people won't. And the general idea that's being put forth is it's kind of their fault, or it's kind of because they didn't have it in them, some other reason that's still marking out people as special. Where the thing that you're saying you're taking away from the movie, which is a much better message than I'm seeing it present, is that anyone can be inspired to be special. But I just don't think that that's really something that the movie is being able to explicitly say. I think that as a reading, it's a very good message to take away. I just disagree that it's done enough to make that the default message of the film.
I think I can agree with that. I would just come back to the statement that I made before, which is that I think the reason it doesn't do that, I think the reason the movie doesn't go all the way in showing the results of this new Tomorrowland is because if it did that, it wouldn't leave us, the audience, with the understanding that we are being tasked with building it. If it showed the movie going all the way, we would leave the theater saying, what a beautiful story, what's next? Rather than, what a beautiful story, I'd like to create what's next.
But see, it's not really saying you are tasked with building it, you, the random person in the theater. It's saying one of these random special people is tasked with building it.
Kepwin, you could be that special person.
Yeah, I definitely didn't feel that way coming out of the movie. I thought that the movie was saying to its entire audience that anyone has the ability to be invited to Tomorrowland, metaphorically, but it doesn't. But a necessary prerequisite is a belief in the improvability of the world, because I absolutely do think that even if you are talented, driven, inspirational, etc., you can fail to make an impact on the world if you assume that your talents will be wasted. If you assume that even if you are all the things the movie is inspiring you to be, but you assume that your talents cannot be impactful, that absolutely can leave someone in a position where they will make no impact. Belief that you cannot make an impact is a poison to actually making an impact, no matter how talented, driven, or capable you are. I think that's a fair statement.
But I still think that they and you in this are still essentially saying we need to pick out the special ones. Just because... But that's the thing.
Who is it saying the specials are?
Yeah, they are saying the specials are the ones with optimism. But most of the way through the movie, the titular character, as it were, who embodies the optimism. Titular is not the right word at all. But the main character who is meant to embody the optimism just is. We don't actually, like, that could even have been a way to get that message across better if she personally had to struggle with some version of maintaining our optimism, starting more pessimistic and becoming optimistic later as a way to change, and that making her one of the special ones. As it stands now, as far as we know, there is just something innate about her that made her immune to the pessimism machine, and that's why things were able to change.
There were actually a couple of deleted scenes that went out of their way to establish Casey as someone who was kind of teetering on the brink into falling into the blackness of pessimism, but they don't count because they got cut, and that is I think, to the movie's detriment. Because the original. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a whole, you mentioned the subplot with the mom dying and all that. That could have been a very key portion in, how she confronted her despair, her impulse to give up on the future, but decided, no, I'm not going to let this, tear me down. This is terrible, and I'm sad because, she's left, but I'm going to keep pushing forward and trying for a better future because, well, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, the movie does a bad job of setting Casey up as being a pessimist on her way to optimism. The best it does is it sets her up as being a teenage rebel, someone who has no direction but isn't at risk of falling into pessimism. I agree. The movie does a bad job.
I think that's very interesting to hang it on that. Like deleted scenes don't count, as we all agree. So the movie that we got wasn't making that message as well as it could. But the cancer subplot that they could have had is actually kind of interesting to me, because one of the things that I had read before in here that was talking about their optimism, and I very much agree with the views on optimism that are presented, is Barbara, oh damn it, how do I say this name?
Streisand.
Aaron Rich, I think. A book called Bright-Sided, which is about America's obsession with optimism as a culture. And one of the key stories in there that she said got her thinking on this as a path is she is a cancer survivor. When she was going through cancer treatment, all of the support groups and people talking to you about going through cancer say how much you have to keep up an optimistic viewpoint and how you need to just fight all the time, keep up your optimism. It's literally the one thing that can be healthy and keep you alive, etc.
Toxic positivity.
Yeah. And she was very upset at the idea that she had cancer because it's an upsetting thing. And everyone said, well, you can't know why you have cancer. It's just one of those things. Stop focusing on the negative. Be positive about it and make yourself better. But actually, turns out she had at some earlier point been giving a medication that was known to have cancer risks. So in fact, we could have known why she had cancer, and it possibly could have been prevented. And that's something that can get lost when you are saying only focus on positive things. And
why I think it's important to make the distinction between default positivity and rational optimism. Because you are 100% right. Positivity can be a toxic and unhealthy trait. The people who refuse to acknowledge that there are bad parts of life, or that the world has bad parts of it, are people who are blind to suffering and are self-delusional. So yes, I completely agree with your thesis here that positivity can be dangerous, just as dangerous as pessimism. And I think the antidote to that, though, isn't better, isn't less negativity or less positivity. It's data-informed world perspectives. It's replacing, to the greatest extent possible, a vibes-based evaluation of the state of the world with a data-based assessment of the world.
But that's still, see, that gets into a really interesting point when you're dealing with your magic MacGuffin machine here. Because as far as they know, that is a 100% accurate, data-driven view of the world.
Except they don't, actually. It's just because what is David Nix's response when he sees that his view of the world, that it is 100% and inevitable? What is his response when that is challenged by the flicker?
Yeah, we get into some sort of thing there
where
he's like, we have, like,
he refuses to believe it. He knocks Frank out and refuses to accept this new data into his worldview.
Which I feel like is, in fact, one of the places that it got kind of confused. Because we don't know what, like, we're saying that the flicker was caused by optimism. Because of this
It was caused by someone refusing to accept the inevitability.
But that gets into a weird cyclical thing there, because they made a data-driven view of the world that they then went, well, this is what the data is telling us, and it's inevitable. And then someone said, oh, what if it's not, though? And that made the data change. But
I think it's more that they. I mean, this is open to interpretation. Your interpretation is just as valid as mine is in this matter, because the movie doesn't make it clear. But I think it's more that they started with a data-driven perspective on the world, but failed to update their priors and let the inevitability substitute for a willingness to update one's worldview as the situation changed.
I think that the problem that they actually hit is, again, they're using the wrong method to tell the wrong story. Because the sci-fi nature of this world that they've presented doesn't make pessimism the problem. It makes inaction and hoarding of technology the problem. He saw
I think that's accurate.
He saw a data-driven version of the world that said the world will end in some unspecified way. And he said, well, fuck them, they deserve it, because I can't change their minds. Instead of, we have just all manner of future tech here. We could probably do something about this ourselves, individually. Like, I, individually, as just the head of this town, could probably fix any problem that this is going to be.
You're saying the villain made the mistake that made them the villain.
But
yes. I guess this maybe touches upon my earlier comment about, can they actually change the change the world beyond their city? I wasn't necessarily talking about the technology, because they obviously have that, but the deployment of the technology is a big question in terms of, all right, so you have all this stuff that can change the world for the better. How do you get it out into the people's hands that will make best use of it to prevent this horrible future?
And that's very apropos, because technological optimism has an over-bias towards finding technological solutions when the problem is not a technical one, it's a logistics one or a systemic one. Like, the problem with world hunger is not that we haven't developed enough food, it's that we don't have the ability or the financial methods to distribute all of that food to who needs it. Which is why I like that the ending montage of the pin distribution doesn't just show inventors. The World Fair left the impression that the only people who were being offered pins were technological inventors, people who were competing for the invention $50. Whereas the closing montage acknowledges that in order to make the vision of Tomorrowland a reality, you need to not just solve the technological problems. You aren't just inviting the automotive engineer, the wind farm technician, the physics professor. You aren't just inviting those people, but you need to also invite in the judges, the on-the-ground aid workers, the people who don't just understand, the people who see a problem as more than just saying, let's invent a new technology, but the people who see a problem and say, let's figure out what systemic obstruction there is to this technology being adopted or to this problem being solved.
I think that there's certain ways in which that actually makes the message of the movie worse. Because if you have a large structural problem with this world in the sci-fi future utopia that, we aren't being shown. We're not being shown what this structural problem is. It seems fairly obvious there's something. But they haven't given us enough information on how this world functions to know what this structural problem might be, but it is something that we know probably isn't the same structural problem that we have, because, as was stated before by the robots, that's kind of the whole point of the thing, is to be away from all of the structural problems of our society and be able to do your own thing and invent all of your stuff and your cool sci-fi gadgets and etc. So that leaves us with the thing that's wrong with this utopian world where all of the cool technology and optimistic future can happen, is the wrong people are there. Which again gets you back to the right people, the special people have to be the ones to do this thing. It's kind of that same sort of,
When you were hitting on something very, very cool that is handled in the deleted scenes. Keep going. I want to see where you take this and see if you take it to the right spot.
It's the same kind of criticism that you have of a lot of neoliberal ideas, of keep the structure the same but change the people who are in charge and that will fix everything.
So this is not at all clear in the movie, but the book, the novelization of this movie, actually does explain what was the structural problem that brought Tomorrowland to the state that it is when we see it, when we visit it. And you're absolutely right. You have kind of you have read between the missing lines of how this story answers it. And the thing that ultimately consumed Tomorrowland in the story is they stopped devoting all of their resources to solving problems and started devoting all of their resources to developing the monitor. If you watch the deleted scenes, there's an extended scene on the train where they're heading to the monitor, where they talk about this, where it's basically the reason that Tomorrowland is the way we see it is because the monitor takes all the power. There's no power left to do anything, to focus on solving any problems other than look at the future with the monitor and try to avert that future. So yeah, you hit on it exactly, that the problem with Tomorrowland, both the metaphorical and the cinematic Tomorrowland, is that they failed to correctly identify the problem and became fixated on a single technical solution.
I suppose it's sort of like you build the world's largest hammer and you have to use it, and thus you only use it on the problem that looks like the world's largest nail.
Yeah, it's like we all know people like this. They see the solution to any problem as being their pet solution. We all know the person who, as soon as you start talking about climate change, immediately says the problem is the solution is nuclear power, more nuclear power, more nuclear power, more nuclear power, more nuclear power, and refuses to acknowledge that no, the solution to climate change is multifaceted, and there is no one solution to it. You need to make thousands of changes in order to solve the problem. It's the same thing with any level of systemic injustice. They say, well, there's just one thing we need to change, and this will go away, when that's not how real problems work. Real problems get solved by not by one singular great thinker having an idea. It's always by thousands of people working incredibly hard, the composition of which is enough to move the needle.
See, so without any of the additional text that they would have needed to added to here, the only thing that you really can take away from them continuing to talk about how the future used to be optimistic and now it is not, is this version of the optimistic future that they keep showing us, which is an inherently technologically based one. So the real only takeaway that you can have from what the movie is presenting to you is technology is the thing that we need to be able to fix this, including the fact that our main optimistic character is shown to be technically minded. It's one of her only main character traits that we see, is that she's good with machinery and figuring things out.
It never says, though, that she knows how technology works, though. It's she knows how stuff works. And it's when she's on her own, when it's just Casey, notice how those talents get deployed. The fact that she knows how stuff works only means she knows how to disable cranes. It's not being put towards solving any real-world problems until she meets someone like Frank, who has the motivation to solve who has the talent to solve real-world problems, but lacks the optimism that Casey has. It's an acknowledgement shown in miniature of what we see in macroscopic at the end at the end montage, that you can't do it alone. You can't solve the world's problems on your own, but if you acknowledge that the world's problems can be solved and cooperate with people who agree, you can move the needle.
Well, I think this has been a very lengthy discussion so far. I don't want to.
Oh yeah, I've had so much fun tonight. Thank you so much, guys. This was fantastic.
Yeah, I don't want to be cutting off too soon, because this is actually great stuff, and I'm just like, I'm kind of nodding along here, so I haven't been really interjecting a whole lot. But I kind of wanted to draw back a little bit to the vision of the future, the monitor device there. It is sort of like an evil version of Epcot, so which I mentioned in the synopsis. But it also now after you mentioned there's deleted scenes about cancer plot lines and things like that, and how this thing is very much drawing all the power from the city, that it is effectively a cancer on the city itself as well. Not just a thing that is putting negativity into the our world, but is something that is malignant on the city and preventing it from thriving into meeting its promise, into evolving into a thing that is able to provide solutions, not just doom and gloom all the time.
Mm-hmm. It is a monoculture. It is the one. It is Tomorrowland becoming fixated on just one thing as a solution to everything.
Yeah, it's almost as bad as that time I made infinite numbers of paper clips.
I think that's that's one of the things in here is yes, the dome, the monitor, is social media, let's say. It's the metaphor for doom scrolling. That's what the thing is doing constantly, running through different apocalyptic scenarios on an endless loop. And they're saying, if you don't do that, you can have an optimistic vision of the future that can change things in a non-specific way. But I still think that what's not getting addressed in this is the systemic nature of a lot of things that are happening. Because they're basically saying optimism can take care of that in a non-specified way, because if you can imagine it being better, it can be. But we still haven't really gotten into the central problem with systemic issues of them being very, very difficult to shift in that kind of way. Because, as I was saying before, like, to use the actual real-world example, next year in the U.S., there's a definite possibility that the way an election goes is going to decide the actual, real, tangible future of a decent segment of the population that has been systemically disempowered for years. And because of a lot of those factors, let's even say that every single disempowered person comes together to try to do something about that, by voting, by having the protests, by having a lot of the things that we've had happen already. Like, there's still little to nothing that they could particularly do about that, because of the way the system has been set up to empower that possibility. And that
You're right.
will
You're completely
have
right.
very tangible negative impacts on them, And the solution that this movie is saying is to think positively about it.
I think what this movie is saying is that optimism is a necessary but not sufficient criteria in order to succeed.
Except that it didn't. Like, I see where you're trying to take that away from the thing. I mean, not trying, sorry, that was a bit rude. But I see where you're taking that away from the message. But you are inherently putting something additional into what the movie is doing. Because it explicitly says in the text of the film that here are a massive series of apocalypses that we have predicted with our future machine are going to happen, and they don't because we made people optimistic. All right? We can imagine that optimism made them go out and change whatever number of things. But the only thing the movie told us happened was people got more optimistic.
The only thing that we see happen is people stopped being made pessimistic. It was the cessation of a harmful action, not the imposition of a beneficial
Okay,
one.
but same...
Which is a necessary step in order for people to improve the world.
But same criticism then. If your issue is that I keep saying that it made them optimistic, fine. So the only thing that the movie tells us, you're right, I'm putting something on it too. The thing that the movie tells us is it stopped making people actively pessimistic. But it still doesn't do anything to show us any level of anything else happening. Like, we can definitely
the consequences
try,
specifically.
we can definitely try to infer that. But it still did basically nothing to show us that. We, in fact, barely see the real world again.
Do you think that the closing montage does that effectively? I guess you clearly don't think the closing montage does that effectively, but do you think the closing montage was at least attempting to do that?
The closing montage was possibly... See, the closing montage couldn't really, because it hadn't set up anything different before. Like, as far as we know, the one and only difference we are seeing in this world as compared to our own is that they have decided to dismantle this one launch platform. A lot of the stuff that they show at the end is things like people working on renewable energy and doing art and a lot of other things that we have absolutely no reason to believe weren't happening already. Because the world that they present to us is similar enough to our own that unless we are told something else is happening, we can only make the natural assumption that most of the things that are happening here now are also happening there.
I think we can make the inference, though, as a matter of what the movie chooses to focus on. Because we don't see legislators legislating, artists arting, and guitarists playing music. We don't see that kind of stuff the entire time that Casey is in the real world before the destruction of the monitor. I think you're right in inferring that because it's our world, we should assume that those things are still happening.
Yeah, well, because
but as a matter of what the movie chooses to focus on,
she spends
I think
most
it's trying
of
to
her time outside of the monitor, either in prison or in the woods.
I don't think so. There's her entire time in school. There's the time when she's on the bus and everyone around her is dead-eyed or reading Toxicosmos, that franchise that keeps popping up as a metaphor for the apocalypse. There's the time when there's more than just the time that she spends in prison.
I mean, that's just what being on the bus is like. I don't know when the last time you were on the bus was. I just think that, like, it's probably one of these million rewrite structural problems. But, like, we can only deal with the movie that we were presented. Because if the one key difference that they tell us is they're dismantling the space program, we then at the end don't really get much idea of how not doing that would change anything.
I don't think it's causative. I think the space programming and the dismantling of the launch pad, is meant to be taken as just the most visible metaphor of...
A symptom, but not the cause.
Sure. A symptom. Like, if if you fix the future, then this will happen.
Which they
not this is
they don't
Go
really
ahead.
link the two. Like, I get that a lot of stuff sees NASA and space exploration as a byword for optimistic future, but they didn't really do a ton to link those two things. They have like one thing about a rocket, and it's the only thing that we really hear in Tomorrowland about space stuff, and as far as we can tell, they just do it for fun.
Well, how would you visually represent? Would you pick a different visual metaphor for the success of the aversion of the apocalypse? Like think about the montage in the monitor when Casey is Google Earth hopping around and seeing all these visual signs that the apocalypse is happening.
I think the thing
how would you do the opposite of that?
Because that's
with the language of film?
only part of a pessimistic present that they show, is this doom-scrolling machine. It's completely disconnected from any vision that we have of how this world may or may not differ from our own. And a lot of the stuff that they show at the end, which is possibly a criticism of the thing itself, if you're saying that that's meant to show a vision of an optimistic future or a non-pessimistic future, like most of the stuff that they show happening at the end is stuff that's happening now. Like people building and repairing wind turbines and doing art and playing guitar, etc. Like that's something that is now happening right now in the real world.
But now it has a chance to work
because
art can't save the world if the nukes are flying.
But only because a robot chose that person as artist enough to do that. Like they didn't set up anything that was different about this world before that. Like if you're saying that showing someone repairing a wind turbine is representative of this because we prevented the apocalypse, but like that's the disconnect. We have a bunch of static where the apocalypse happens. We have no idea what was leading up to it. We have no idea what prevented it other than not doom scrolling.
Right,
So you want more specificity. Yeah.
I don't think, like, I agree that not having the specificity is a necessary part of the message, but it also is fundamentally undermining to its own message.
Do you think it would have been a better film if it had been more specific about the cause of the apocalypse and what it took to prevent it? I think it would have been a compelling film, but I don't think it would have had as broad and impactful of a message as it was trying to shoot for. But the thing
is, it is specific in its non-specificity, and that then recommends a specific solution, which is the thing that I'm critiquing. Like, you are saying that specific solution should be broadened and expanded upon in a way that the movie isn't communicating. It's because it's non-specific about the apocalypse message. Like, one of the things that I think you could do to possibly fix it a little bit is to show the opposite stuff happening while she's traveling around the country. They have a whole section where she's traveling around the country. You could show them driving by a wind farm in disrepair, or people sitting around next to instruments and not playing them, people being depressed or pessimistic.
They do try to show that, but it's meant to show that people were being susceptible to the monitor. So, for example, the security guard in the shack to the launch pad, he's playing an apocalyptic video game. The tender at the store, the first robot at Blast from the Past, she's watching an atomic bomb on the TV. She's watching a post-apocalyptic movie. They do try to do that in the movie, but I agree, it could have been done better, especially because they're not trying to show what, as you say, is symptoms of a world gone wrong that Tomorrowland then fixes.
Yeah, see,
what they're actually showing is this is the monitor at work.
And because they're not showing any symptoms at all, even non-specific sort of general, malaise symptoms, the only two things that we are told is everyone is being pessimistic because of this thing that in some way causes an apocalyptic event. And then them not being pessimistic fixes said apocalyptic event.
because improving the world requires, as a necessary first step, a belief that the world can be improved.
But because they didn't show us anything else happening, the takeaway that you can very easily get from that is not first step, but only step.
So we need a sequel.
They could have even said, like, moved the damn apocalypse. Like, the fact that the main problem that I think is incurring here is the fact that they did actively prevent an impending apocalypse by making everyone less pessimistic about it. And that is the only thing that we're shown happening. If this was a even slightly further out apocalypse, and the ending message of the movie was, now we have a chance, and let's get the people together who are going to start working towards it, I think it would have been a very different message than, we made people less pessimistic, and that fixed it.
I read it as, we stopped the thing that was making people pessimistic, and that allows them to fix it.
But either way, like, there not being a thing that was fixed, it's such a central part of the movie that is left blank. The only thing that happened was people being less pessimistic. From our viewpoint, we saw nothing going wrong, and then we saw nothing being fixed. The only thing textually the movie tells us is happening is people are pessimistic on one end of the apocalypse and not on the other.
And I think that's because if we had shown everything getting fixed, we would have left the film seeing it as a self-contained story about avoiding the end of the world, without taking it as a command to go out and do it.
But we did avoid it. Textually in the movie, we did already avoid it.
Well, this also kind of gets back to that earlier thing about, if you having too much confidence that everything's going to be great is also a problem, because then you are also not being active about it. But without the monitor, being existing anymore, you don't know what the future is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so you don't know what it's going to be, what its new readout is given, its post-destruction status. We are in uncharted territory. We have to make our way forward. And I'm also going to maybe suggest that we wrap this up a little bit, because I think you guys are kind of hitting the same points over and over again at this point. And don't want to be much of a mediator here. So final thoughts on this particular part of it. Go.
Only to say,
I command it.
Only to say that, this movie is full of flaws, and it's. I don't even know if I'd enjoy talking about it so much if these flaws had been fixed. I think I would have just enjoyed it without feeling the need to talk about it so much, because it's easier to love something when it's perfect. It's harder to love something when it is imperfect and you see what it could have been. And I'm sure that wasn't the intention of this movie. Like we talked about, it is Brad Bird's least successful film from a financial and audience approval point of view. So I'm sure he would have, and I would have preferred the movie to have fixed these very serious structural problems and been a lot clearer with its message. But partially just the combination of where I was in my life when it came out, and where the world seemed like it was, and where we know the world was heading in 2015 when it came out, now with the benefit of hindsight. I still can't find it in myself to condemn the movie for its many, many faults, simply because, as Isaac pointed out earlier on, trying to accomplish what it did and failing at it is in many ways, I think, more admirable than just being another run-of-the-mill film in the same theme of the kind of films that were coming out around that time. Even if it had been a good movie, I think it would have stood out less. It would have failed to leave as much of an impact if it had fixed some of those things that make it such a unique and interesting film to dissect.
Kaplan?
I think that does get into probably why this is becoming an unresolvable argument, because so much of the film being essentially missing or put on the cutting room floor or lost in rewrites. the message is in where you fill in the blanks, because it's all you can really do. So it's probably saying a lot more about some of the belief system of the person watching than any particular message that the movie itself is really getting across. Because if you just look at the things that are only in the film, it's getting across very little, which is kind of where we're getting into arguments.
Physics?
And I guess my ending bit on this is that it's a flawed movie. I enjoyed it, as I mentioned before, but to pick a message of it is workable given what is there, but it would have been more solid and more obvious what it's going for if there had been some of the holes filled in. But I don't think the holes being there are necessarily to its benefit in terms of making it a more memorable film. So I guess I'm going to both disagree with both of you in some fashion. That there is a lot of good stuff here that could very much have been repackaged, rearranged, smoothed out to hit the themes better, and to even with like little things to tighten it up, and maybe like for example, as I said before, the monitor's gone and you just don't know what the future is. Maybe in its last sort of moments there, we flash over to Frank's countdown death clock there, and the numbers start going up very quickly, but they don't go away. So there might still be apocalypse out there, but it's now going to be possible to avert it, as opposed to it's going to happen in just so many days. So there's options here in order to make it a better film, but it is still, I guess, workable for me as it is. So shall I talk about Leibniz?
Well, this has been an incredible amount of fun.
Yeah. Well,
guys, thank you so much for having me on.
For this to be listenable at all, it might have to wind up being a two-parter. So anyway, now we can do the palate cleanser thing.
Not yet. Yeah. Not yet. There's one more thing I wanted to bring up. The International Geophysical Year.
That's right. 1964. 1964 wasn't just about Sputnik.
There's technically there's the whole multiple international polar years, but there the IGY is also known as the third international polar year. It was basically like, we're going to start doing science together like internationally because World War II is over and we can like talk to each other and cool stuff like that. So like, let's start getting started here, guys. They did.
Also, what am I saying? Sputnik was 57, not 64. What am I saying? Never mind.
Well, 57 was the International Geophysical Year, so that actually predates the World's Fair point there by a few years in terms of the timeline of the movie. But this movie, in terms of its sort of feel, aesthetics, and things like that, reminds me a lot of the song IGY. Which is by a fellow named Donald Fagin, spelled differently than your last name.
They all are.
Yeah. That I listened to a lot when I was a kid. And so I guess a certain part of my own previous old version of the future, vision of the future, kind of came out of that song and a lot of the other sort of medias I was exposed to at the time. But, it is very much a tune about, it's a streamlined world. There's, cool stuff going on. There's trains under the ocean. There's, computers that are able to solve all our big problems. And everything's pretty cool like that. And so, I guess it kind of hit back on me in that sort of nostalgia a little bit. So that might be one of the reasons, I feel about it as I do. But I just kind of wanted to bring that up because that's a song I like, and it has some interesting stuff because it was named after the IGY, the International Geophysical Year, which, has a bunch of science stuff attached to it, also Sputnik and, all that. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that was kind of going on there. And it's like, let's go study space. Let's go get some meteorological maps. Let's go do some Earth science, study auroras, oceanography, seismology, all sorts of cool stuff. and a bunch of countries came together and like, we're going to come together, do some science, and well, that's kind of what Tomorrowland is kind of about in terms of the city itself there. The movies, we've already gone through, is about a lot of things, or maybe other things depending on, I guess, your interpretations. But in terms of the original premise of the city itself, in the context of the film, it's very much in that same spirit. So that was kind of an interesting sort of thing I gotta think about a little bit while I was watching the movie there. So just kind of wanted to bring that up. Didn't know where to sort of fit it in so far in the discussion. So just tacking it on here at the end, right before
we do our palate cleanser thing after we've all been arguing for several hours. So the Galaxy's favorite game show.
Woo!
Yeah!
Yay! Hey everybody, welcome to the Galaxy's favorite game show. We got lots of contestants today, we got our guest judges, we got our various points being racked up, and everybody's going to get something here, I think. So let's go ahead and get started. The first prize is the Everybody Loves Robots prize, which goes to Athena and the various cyborgs and robots and how was it pronounced? The
Audio animatronics.
The audio animatronics. So what do they win, Kaplan?
They win what all audio animatronics eventually win, which is a nice long retirement of chasing each other around in an endless loop in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Excellent. They get to swing some swords, and that's pretty fun. Our second prize is the To Die is Logical prize, which goes to Nyx for a cynical embracing of the end of the world. What does he win, Max?
He wins what his final wish was. Bollocks.
Well, I'm not sure how we're going to be delivering that to him, but yes. Our third prize is the Get Off My Lawn prize, which goes to Frank for his attempts to get Casey to leave him be. What does Frank win, Geplin?
Frank wins some very low-to-the-ground bright white barriers that you can put around your lawn to let everyone know that if you go in there, there's a potential random chance you might be killed through lethal injection.
I'm not sure where we're going to get the various supplies for these prizes this week, but we'll see what we have in the back. We just need the lines, not the actual lethal injection. Got it. Okay, cool. Our fourth prize today is the Useful Death prize, which goes to Athena for using her final end to stop the tachyon machine at the monitor. What does she win, Max?
Athena wins an all-access vacation with Data and the Iron Giant and every other robot that has had to suffer the indignity of being the one who dies so the meat sacks can go on living.
I would say something about Bender, but last I knew he was still alive. So enjoy your data plan, Athena. Our fifth one here is the Z-Rust prize, which goes to the Tomorrowland City in a very much more literal format this time, as the optimistic future of decades past sure has gotten a lot rustier these days. What do they win? What does the city win, Geplin?
The city wins being the setting of the next Fallout game, because it's basically, retro future that has gone to shit with time. Is just basically post-apocalyptic fiction.
Well, since they use some real-world locations, that's actually quite workable. Anywho, the next prize is a single word, which goes to Casey for seeking, hoping, and working for a better future, and thus casting doubt on the dire predictions that all is already lost. What does she win, Max?
Casey wins everything she ever dreamed of, which is a world full of those who understand that even a podcast, even the smallest of podcasts, or even a brutally flawed movie, no matter how small, no matter how intended, even the smallest of acts, can change the world.
Hear, hear. Now I'm going to take one for myself here. I'm going to hand out the Puny God Prize, which goes to the monitor, because, it can see the future, but it can't see this. Insert explosion sound here.
Yes, thank you, everyone, including guest judge, for putting up with our weird little fun thing we do at the end of the episodes here called the Galaxy's Favorite Game Show.
Woohoo! So, Max, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter, now X, at Max Fagin, Fagin. I also have a YouTube channel at Max Fagin. Been on YouTube for going on 15 years now, and I do dabble in SciComm education and space science. But thank you so much for having me on. This has been an absolute goddamn delight.
Yeah, you have more subscribers than I do.
That's very impressive, actually. I haven't been on YouTube for that long. I gave it up after a bit.
Yeah, my very first upload was a shot-for-shot remake of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I just went downhill from there.
Well,
you got a lot of material here, and I should really get back to watching through your stuff. It's been a while. Yeah.
Please, yes, Go check out Max. Thank you for coming in and having this very interesting discussion of a movie that I otherwise would have forgotten existed.
Yep, and we're coming up on its 10th anniversary, so you may start hearing about it a little bit more. I apologize for that if you want to go back to forgetting that the movie existed.
Phobos on the space elevator.
Space elevator? Did someone say space elevator?
You did, apparently.
Space elevator.
Just looking at your video list. But yeah, so...
Yeah, you changed my mind. I hate this movie. It doesn't have any space elevators.
Well, maybe if they do come up with a sequel, that'll be about building a space elevator, on top of the actual main plot. But there'll be a space elevator, it'll be under construction, and it'll retroactively help this one.
I'll take it. Perfect. No notes. Make that film for me.
Ha-ha! So Gepwin, I think I went ahead and claimed our next episode actually already.
Yes, because you were really excited to get to do a movie because, the mid-season movie thing usually supplants our other movie go through, so we had to skip one to, do things. But apparently you're really excited about this.
Well, sufficiently excited. It is a strange movie. Max, have you ever seen the movie The Congress?
I have not. That sounds incredibly boring, but I bet it's a sleeper.
It has some dull moments, I will admit that, but it's a film that is sort of a weird meta, actor sequel to The Princess Bride, in that the main lady, I forget her name right now.
Robin White?
Yeah. She is the main character of this film, playing herself. And then things get weird.
How many movies can you summarize that as the tagline? And then things got weird.
Get weird.
Basically everything we ever watch.
Yeah, true. Like the first third of the movie is, it's like, okay, she's, being an actress and has a couple kids and, she's going in, doing this thing that will help her basically continue acting without actually having to be an actress. AKA, they're going to do it with computers, but they're going to actually pay her for her image, which I know seems kind of, anachronistic already somehow, but then about a third of the movie way into the movie, we jump forward a few years, and then she takes a bit of chemistry, drug stuff, I guess, and then gets reality gets bent for a while. Let's just say that. AKA, it's animated for the next hour.
Got it. Well, I'm very glad to hear that this is not just a 2 hours of C-SPAN.
No. So, Gepwin, if we ever wanted to do another April Fool's episode, that might be something to do.
Yeah, 2 hours of C-SPAN.
Yes. It's like, oh yeah, I know this guy. He's the one from the 4th District, Missouri, and last year he said this. There was other thing, and I think he has a beef with this other person over here.
If anything's going to make you pessimistic about the future, it's going to be 2 hours of C-SPAN.
Yep. None of those people are getting a pin.
Yes. Note to self: don't run for Congress. I won't get my pin. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be poking at next week, or next Or whenever the next episode comes
So,
out, because
yeah, we don't know
a little
yet.
bit of a break.
We're on our mid-season
Yes.
break. Well, as you're listening to this, very probably our first two-parter, I would imagine. We'll find a place to split it in here somewhere. So thank you
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be
for dealing with that.
Get when I'm going to be editing, so
Yeah.
you know.
So thank you all for putting up with a very long discussion that I hope you found interesting enough to stick through. And next time we'll be having what sounds like incredibly confusing discussion about AI acting, probably.
Well,
and maybe
it
the
gets
nature
more
of
than that,
consciousness.
but yeah. And, you know, what is art? And can new art be made if everything's a copy? Max, do you have an answer for that?
Yes.
Okay, you have an answer for that. Got it. All right. Well, in that case, I'll see everybody next time.
All right. Take care, guys. It was great meeting you all, and thank you for the wonderful discussion.
That's been great fun.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you for
us.
being here.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, embrace the wonders of chemistry. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.